Welcome to Cannabis Health Radio, a podcast where we share stories from people around the world who are using cannabis as medicine. The information is meant to raise awareness about the health benefits of cannabis, but should not be taken as medical advice. Now, here are your hosts, Ian Jessup and Corey Yelland.
And welcome to another episode of Cannabis Health Radio. I'm Ian Jessup.
And I'm Corey Yelland.
And before we start our interview, I'd just like to encourage people to subscribe to our YouTube channel and share it with others who you think may be interested. And also, if you want to spread the word about our show, Cannabis Health Radio, write a review on the media platform you listen to and share our podcasts on social media. You never know. You just might save a life. Now, cancer is the leading cause of death worldwide, taking 10 million lives each year. And for women, ovarian cancer is ranked as the fifth most problematic cancer. Surgery and chemotherapy are generally used to treat ovarian cancer. Now, joining us from Colorado to tell her story about ovarian cancer and the role cannabis has played in her treatment is Michelle Kendall. Michelle, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my story.
Now, Michelle, how were you feeling prior to your diagnosis?
That's the especially terrible thing about ovarian cancer is that the symptoms are very mild generally and vague. I was misdiagnosed for almost 6 months with symptoms that did get gradually worse, but in general, I had no idea that anything this serious was wrong with me. I was in my early 40s. So initially, the very first symptom that I had that was really odd and that's common with ovarian cancer is to feel full quickly. And I did feel that a little bit. I had some swings in my bowels from one extreme to another for a while, but then they would sort of clear up. So it wasn't until for a good, 4 or 5 months that I finally felt a mass in my abdomen, and then we got closer to a diagnosis more quickly. But ovarian cancer does have symptoms. They call it the silent killer, and there are symptoms, but they're very mild, and it's easy to confuse them with just GI issues. It's.
Now, I assume that you were a pretty healthy person up to then.
I was. I had never had any major anything before. My husband and I are very active and fit, and ovarian cancer doesn't really have direct causes that are known yet. I mean, clearly there are genetic and mutation issues going on, but obesity and smoking are not really tightly correlated with ovarian cancer, and those don't apply to me. So it's a nasty cancer. It's a nasty cancer, and once it's recurred, it's terminal. The chemo will extend life, but there are no cures. So most women die of ovarian cancer after about 5 years of pretty awful treatments.
Tell us about the day and what went through your mind the day the doctor told you that you had cancer.
Yeah, I knew something was wrong with me, and I was getting more desperate and worried, but I still didn't believe it. When I woke up from surgery, I had 54 staples, stem to stern, from my pelvis or my pelvic floor all the way up to my sternum, and I just felt like I'd been kidnapped out of my life and my body. It was very shocking, and when I read the statistics that it was most likely going to be a terminal diagnosis, it was really sobering, absolutely devastating to have that diagnosis in your early 40s and to have done everything right in life and to be healthy and to have no warning, and especially to have gone to the doctor and said, I don't feel right, and be misdiagnosed. It's the tragedy that so many women with ovarian cancer that, share that very same story.
What was the surgery you had?
So basically, all of my female parts came out, my cervix, my uterus, both ovaries, both fallopian tubes, which is typical, but then also the peritoneal lining, which is the lining of the abdomen. So they peel all that off to try to capture any last cells. So I was staged during surgery at 3C, which is typical. That's where I think maybe 70% of most ovarian cancer patients are finally diagnosed. And by that time, it's spread throughout the abdomen. And that's when the survival really goes down. So they take all that lining to try to capture any stray cells. And then I also had a small piece of my diaphragm resected. And so there's a little gully on the side of the abdomen deep inside called Morrison's pouch. And I guess that in advanced C3 cases, that's where the cancer likes to grow. It just tends to sort of do that. And so they took a piece of my diaphragm out. So yeah, that was that. And then my second surgery, they took out my gallbladder, and thank goodness they left my pancreas. But the tumor was wrapped around all up there, and they took out lymph nodes around my aorta. So part of it had metastasized up, and then part of it had metastasized down to the lymph nodes in my lower groin.
Wow, so it's safe to say this was pretty extensive.
Yeah, I was in hospital for 10 days. My husband is a professor. We happened to be in Oxford at the time. So I was in the UK and had my surgery there. All of this just happened while we happened to be on sabbatical. So I was in hospital 10 days, and then I had a few weeks rest, and then I started the chemo couplet that's typical for ovarian and most of the cancers that they don't have good treatments for is the standard Taxol and carboplatin. And I had 6 cycles of that. So I had a very typical normal treatment for the first 2 recurrences of my cancer.
What prognosis did the doctors give you when the surgery was over?
Some women can have that type of surgery and they won't have a recurrence, but it's not very many. So 3C is just right on the edge of it's metastatic and we can't really get it all. So they told me if I made it more than a year and I didn't have a recurrence, that maybe I would make it. But most women recur within a year or about 14 months, and then you can continue to have treatments, but it just keeps coming back. The cancer stem cells are not killed by the chemo, and so I knew that it was likely a terminal diagnosis. The oncologist didn't want to tell me that, but that's the reality of it.
Emotionally, I can't imagine. I mean, Corey's gone through it, you've gone through it, a number of people we've talked to, but just to be told that your time is limited in not only years, but 2 months, that must be really damaging psychologically.
Yeah, it is. I haven't actually been told I only have months to live yet. But I think if I asked my oncologist today, she would probably say I have about a year. But it is, and I do feel like it's made me a little crazy, especially given the situation of saying this plant, this illegal compound is helping me. And I think it takes a really strong person to get through this when the medical community is, and the world is all saying, that you're a little bit nuts. And yeah, it has been very hard. It has been very hard.
Mm-hmm. Now, how many chemo sessions did you undergo?
So I'm on my 3rd recurrence. I didn't discover cannabis until my 2nd recurrence. So I've had 3 complete series of 6 chemo couplets, so 18 cycles of chemotherapy. Most of those have all been carboplatin. 12 of those were Taxol, and I'm coming up on my lifetime limit of Taxol. So the last chemo cycle, I switched to doxorubicin, and I think I could probably handle more chemo. Many women are going through 4 and 5 sort of series of chemo because typically ovarian cancer responds very well to chemo, but it just will, continue to come back. So far I've had 18 chemos and probably about that same many Avastin, which isn't a chemotherapy. It's an immunotherapy that limits a specific protein that the body needs to make new blood vessels. So it starves the tumor of blood supply. It just slows growth down a bit.
I watched your video, which was excellent, the video of your story, and you were talking in your car about going to your next chemotherapy treatment, and you were really struggling. You were almost in tears, and you just didn't want to do it. Does that happen often to you?
The first series of chemo I had in the UK, I felt okay. I mean, I didn't feel great, but it wasn't, I didn't complain, and I felt like this is manageable. And I thought, oh, these people complaining about chemo, it's not so bad. But of course, I was really young. The second series was harder. And then when I switched to doxorubicin, it was much harder. I was having uncontrolled nausea and having to go back 3 days after my infusion to get liquids because I was having trouble keeping anything down. And that was even with a lot of, extra anti-nausea meds. So I definitely feel it got harder during the treatment. And also now I've had so much Taxol, I can really feel the damage of the nerves in my feet. My toes are numb. My feet ache, and sort of everything below my knee feels sort of slightly deadened. So it's only since the last few cycles that I've really felt like I don't know if this is worth it anymore. And it's easy to say that, but of course, if push came to shove and I had to, I probably would do more. But it's definitely much harder on the body than the cannabis is, for sure.
Tell us how cannabis entered into your treatment protocol.
Yeah, let's talk about cannabis, my favorite thing to talk about. So I had been through 2 recurrences, and I knew that I was terminal, and I knew I had more time, but I just became much more open to things. And I realized that if I just let my doctor drive this process, that I'll be dead in a few years, not because I don't trust her or because she isn't trying, but the toolkit, there's only so many things. And I thought I have to take charge of this. And I kept hearing about cannabis, and I watched, eventually found your website, and I thought, this just can't be true. How can these 2, crazy folks up in Canada and all these other little websites that I was finding, how can this be true that there's something that will work that the doctor isn't telling me about? And as someone who comes from a family of physicians and is very sort of mainstream and not a conspiracy theorist, I just had such a hard time understanding how this was possible. But then, of course, when you learn about the history of cannabis and then, of course, the endocannabinoid system, the fact that we're here, it all makes sense. But it's just such an odd path to find a plant medicine that might help that's been forbidden. So I started reading, and I thought, this seems real. And being a sciencey kind of person, I just got myself into PubMed and started reading. And I could not believe what I was reading. The preclinical data has been piling up, and I just was amazed. So I'd send papers to my dad, who's a urologist. And of course, at first he thought I was, being desperate, which of course I am. But, the science is there. It's not fully figured out by any means. But I started taking it. And it was as simple as that. I started with chocolates that the neighbor made for me. He's a retired general practitioner, and his retirement project, he's been quite interested in cannabinoids. And he was giving me chocolates, and I took those. And my tumor marker was only going up 1 point every 3 weeks, which was much slower than we had anticipated, since we had seen the growth from the previous remission, where it really shot up once it started going. So then we went to the Galapagos. This was a year and a half ago now. And I was off all the medication because, of course, it's illegal to travel with it, and especially internationally. And my tumor marker shot up 8 points in those 3 weeks. And that's when I knew that this is absolutely driving my tumor. And I had to, go whole hog into this and do everything I could. And so I contacted the local growers, and they helped me source oil. And I started every 3 weeks trying to do a different formula to try to figure out how it was working and what was working. I hate the fact that I have to just take a lot of this and not know how it's working. I really want to understand to give myself the best chance of curing this. So I'm just really focused on trying to, pull the science apart the best I can.
One of the things that listeners like, sorry, Corey, one of the things listeners like is to have you tell how much cannabis you take and how strong it is.
Sure. So during the last year, just over a year ago, when I shrank my tumor, I was on a full spectrum extract of approximately 80 milligrams a day, which I'd gradually worked up to. And yes, that was hard to take. I never felt bad, but I was definitely zonked out. And I had lots of friends come over to keep me company. I wasn't driving. And so I did that with the help of Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, who I found through Read the People after I had, worked on it on my own. So she upped my dose quite a bit and she added in more compounds. So I was on CBD, CBDA, CBG, THC, and THCA in a formula that she's worked on. And so in 5 weeks, my tumor marker fell 50%, which was faster than any chemo that I had actually.
Wow.
Yeah, and my oncologist, who I've always told what I'm doing, and she is the one who's written my recommendation, which is, of course, the word instead of a prescription. And she was very supportive, but it did freak her out because doctors are trained that this is, a drug of abuse. And I bring her papers, and she's definitely more open to it now, but it just scares her because she doesn't understand how it's working. So at that point, after shrinking my tumor on that high dose, I had already had surgery scheduled, and it happened so quickly. If I'd had a bit more time, and if I had at that point had already met Dr. Bonnie, maybe I would have said no to surgery. But I said, let's just do it to make sure that they get as much cancer out as they can. And then I know the cannabis will always be there. So then I had a second surgery where they took out the lymph nodes, and my dose now is about 30 milligrams a day. And my blood work last week, my tumor marker did go up a tiny bit. So I'm trying to find the dose that will keep it knocked down, but is the smallest dose possible so that I can continue to live a big, full life.
Michelle, do you happen to know the percent of any of the stuff that you're taking? Like what percent THC and what percent CBD?
very, very high percentage. And I wish, Corey, I could give you more details, but because we're not in my home office right now, and we're COVID refugees, I don't have all my giant files.
Yeah, sure, but that's fine.
Yeah, but definitely very high percentage of THC. And, being the sciencey person, Dr. Mieri's paper from Israel, that really seminal work that came out just a year ago, it showed that the strains that are working best definitely have, 50, 60% THC. Mm-hmm. So it does seem to be critical.
Do you know if you're on a mixed strain oil or just a single strain?
So at nighttime, I take more indica, of course, and then I do take some sativa during the day to try to perk me up in the morning, because on the big doses, boy, did I sleep.
Do you know if that indica, for example, is a mixture of different strains, like, say, Purple Kush, White Widow, whatever, or is it one particular strain?
Yeah, so the growers have been wonderful to test the oil for me. So I have really, being a sciencey kind of person, I really have just stepped right over the strains because I found that confusing, and I try to go straight to the chemistry because of the way they overlap. And so I really haven't read that much about strains because it just got me too confused.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's so much, in my experience, although, I'm not the be-all, end-all in this, I don't think it's so much about strains as getting a combination.
Yeah, you definitely want to get a lot of the different, the compounds. Yeah. And some of the very minor compounds seem like they might be some of the most important from that paper from Dr. Mieri last year, Heterogeneity and Complexity in Anti-Tumor Properties of Cannabis. I think that's the title. CBT, which is a very minor cannabinoid, the few strains that seem like they might be working best, and this is, of course, all preclinical, but some of those CBT was quite high. So it's just hard to overstate how complicated the chemistry is, and different types of cancers that are driven by different types of mutations need different combinations of the chemical. So it's too bad that it's not easier to figure out. I mean, the chemistry is incredibly complicated.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's interesting. When I first started on this journey 8 years ago, it was all about getting high THC. And certainly we're becoming increasingly aware that it's not all about THC, that these other cannabinoids.
They all can do, different things. And I can't wait for the day when we understand it better. Wouldn't it be great to be able to do some science and figure this out?
You've had some pretty good doctors, Bonnie Goldstein and was it Dr. Bierman?
Yeah, so Dr. Bierman lives very close to me, and that was just part of the crazy journey of this.
Yeah.
Is, struggling, and all of a sudden someone tells me, well, why don't you go see Dr. Bierman? And I'm like, well, who's he? And then, my oncologist didn't think to send me to him. And that's part of this reason I have to keep telling this story, is we have to empower patients to try if they want, and keep looking for answers, and get the oncologists to be more open to it when patients are really out of other choices.
Yeah, I think they would both be interesting for us to interview. I've sent an email request to Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, but she didn't get back to me. So the next time you see her, tell her we'd be interested in talking to her.
I will, yes. We have a Skype appointment. I email her whenever I have blood work, and every now and then we'll Skype and check in. So I will. And Dr. Bierman as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle, would you say that without cannabis, you may not be here today?
I'd say that I would be coming up close to being dead right about now. So last year on the cannabis, if I hadn't been taking it, I know that my tumor would have been growing much, much faster and more aggressively. And I don't think my surgery that I had just over a year ago would have been as successful, because all that time before surgery, I shrank my tumor. So I think that I probably would be dying right about now. Yeah, I would.
Last week we talked to a woman in New Hampshire who told us that taking cannabis for her breast cancer eradicated the breast cancer, but she said, I also have other benefits, and her eyesight got better. Do you have any other benefits that have been attributed to cannabis?
What a great question.
That you're aware of?
It's definitely sleep. Gosh, such good sleep. Yeah. I think as far as the stress of dealing with a terminal diagnosis, that the cannabis has been really helpful for my mental health, for sure. Physically, I feel really good. I don't have very much pain. I get funny tightness up by my diaphragm when my gut's moving around, but it's usually temporary. Other benefits. Well, it's helped tremendously with the neuropathic pain in my feet. Mm-hmm. So my oncologist gave me a prescription for a pharmaceutical pain pill for the neuropathy, and I tried it for like a week. And then I started using the THC pain cream that the growers gave me, and that worked much better. And it's hitting a different pain receptor, and so that's been a benefit for sure for my little pinky toes that ache all the time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, in your video, you said that you suggested that people not abandon conventional treatment, but try cannabis as a complement to us. Now, tell us why you're supportive of conventional treatment.
Well, some cancers don't respond to cannabis, and I really don't like giving medical advice. Like, I feel like this whole situation is so uncomfortable. We shouldn't have to be lobbying the doctors, right? I wish they would look at the science, but given the situation we're in, we have to. So, but some cancers don't respond at all, and it is very complicated. And there are a lot of chemical interactions, not so much with chemo, but with some of the immunotherapies. So, I just wouldn't want someone who had a cancer that was really easy to cure with a round of chemo to not do that and think that the cannabis was a magic cure-all, because it definitely isn't. But obviously people can do whatever they want. I think anyone with a terminal diagnosis should just get to do whatever they want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Your cannabis enlightenment is much like mine. I didn't really give it much of a thought until I started interviewing Corey when I was in commercial radio. And it was really an eye-opener. And the podcasts we've done, you're number 276, the podcasts we've done, and hearing the remarkable stories that people tell us about the medical benefits of cannabis and what it has done for them has really changed my attitude towards it big time, to the point where I take a little bit every day, not because I have an illness, but because it just, it just makes you feel better, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It's hard to explain to people.
Yeah, I think Dustin Sulak, Dr. Sulak, who I was fortunate to spend time with, and it was in the film, he would certainly agree with you. And that was the first place that I heard about what he would call microdosing as a supplement, and that people should be taking a small dose, 5 milligrams every morning and 5 milligrams every night or something. I don't know what he would suggest, but that it's just a good, healthy supplement to take every day. And I believe that for sure.
What was your attitude towards cannabis prior to your illness?
Ian, I don't even know if I had an attitude because it was just not on my radar. I had never experienced cannabis in my entire life. I didn't care one way or the other. I mean, I knew friends that I respected, accomplished people in our lives that would smoke if we went to a party and we were playing charades out by their fire pit and people would be passing a joint around. It didn't bother me at all, but I just didn't really care. I had no knowledge. I was kind of a blank slate.
Yeah, when you start to research cannabis and the medical benefits of it and what it does for the human body and the endocannabinoid system, I read something the other day that the endocannabinoid system is only taught in 13% of medical schools in the United States. So sometimes you ask a doctor about the endocannabinoid system and he or she won't know what you're talking about, unless they're younger.
Yes, my dad being one of them. And he was really appalled and embarrassed. I mean, of course, he's in his late 70s and graduated medical school long before the endocannabinoid system was discovered. But something that is the master regulator of our other systems, it's criminal. It needs to be in every medical school curriculum. And that's one thing people can do is next time you go to the doctor, ask your doctor, what do you know about the endocannabinoid system? And print up a paper, take it to them. The fact that this master thermostat that regulates all these other systems isn't taught. I mean, I just don't understand. Whether the stigma is so great. It's really, really tragic. It's changing fast, though. I know it's changing fast.
It is. Dr. Bierman pointed out correctly that prior to 1937, 1/3 of all prescriptions written by doctors in the United States contained cannabis.
Yes, exactly. And hopefully we'll get back there soon. I don't have a lot of hope for the United States, but Canada's doing great things, and Australia and Israel, of course. So I might have to move. I really... Like last year when I shrank my tumor, it's hard to explain. I'm going to cry. If you have a year left and you've been preparing to die, and then all of a sudden a new treatment comes and you have some real hope. And I was so elated and happy and thought this is more time. And it took a long time to sink in. And now I'm angry. Like, I want my life. I don't want to be a felon. I want to be able to travel. I want my doctors to know what medication is doing to me. I want the full force of science to cure me. And the government is saying, you can't do that science. And I can't think of anything more unjust.
No, you're absolutely correct. Tell me, Michelle, how has your husband responded to your illness?
Oh, God, I am so lucky. It's been hard on him. I'm definitely less capable of some things if I'm really on the higher doses. Like, for example, I didn't do our taxes this year. So I do feel like I've had some memory issues, and I'm a little bit fuzzy sometimes, but he's so supportive. And he just said, if you have to be high every day for the rest of your life, we'll do it, Mm-hmm. He's there to help me. So I feel very lucky, and I feel grateful that he understands the science. We read all the papers together, and he knows that I'm not crazy, that we're all not crazy. So that's really nice. I really want to try to jumpstart science in some way, and he's helping me brainstorm foundations and trying to reach out to researchers around the world to say this works. And there's real potential here. When I hear the researchers saying it may be 10 or 20 years before there are treatments, it makes me sad to think that they don't have a bolder vision that this can work right now. And so he's helping me contact people, and I really want to use my story in the most efficient way possible to bring change.
Do you know what? You're going to make it through this, and in 5 years, we'll talk to you again, and you'll look back in those five years, and you'll be amazed I believe, at the change in attitude of society towards cannabis.
I hope so, Ian. I hope so. I'll take you up on that. I want to go back
Okay.
to Burchart Gardens. We'll come and visit.
Oh, you've
Right.
been here, have you?
Oh, a long, long time ago when I was a teen. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Not that long ago. Michelle, in closing, what advice would you give to people about the use of cannabis for medical purposes?
Yeah, I would say tell your doctor, because there are interactions. And if they're not supportive, find a new doctor if you need to. And I would say the science is so uncertain in so many ways that if you have a serious illness like cancer, try to set up a protocol where you can change your dosing and change your strains and change the different compounds within blood work. If you get blood work, it makes it a lot easier. If you're trying to do this and you only have a scan every 6 months, I think it's scarier because you don't know if it's working. But I definitely would say if you're out of options, try it. I was, the first time I went to the dispensary and I got a tiny little mint that was 2.5 milligrams. And I was so scared to take it. And it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I waited for Bruce to come home from work and then I felt nothing. So, nothing, absolutely nothing. I thought, this is ridiculous. Why was I so scared of this? So I would just tell people to not be scared and to go slow and to try to do it in the scientific way so that you can make the best choices. I mean, if you really have a serious illness like I do and you have to try to make every decision right, just try to do it systematically, but definitely try. There's so much hope in this plant.
Michelle, you were wonderful. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ian. I'd like to ask you guys a question or two.
Sure, fire away.
I think that it would be so helpful to try to collect the case studies with the kinds of details, with the cell type, the broken pathways, like of everyone who's had really great responses. Do you know of anyone who's collecting that information? Because I'm worried it will be so long before we can do any real science, but we can sort of back end it. If we get 100 people who all have said, I had a great response on cannabis, and we can look at their cell type and their broken pathways, someone who really understands that might be able to figure it out that way.
Corey, would Ethan Russo in Washington State have that?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I know, of course, Ethan's doing lots of great science, but just all these case studies, I'm really motivated to try to collect that and see if someone can figure it out, because I that's why whenever I do my social media posts, I always put my cell type and my mutations, because some woman in Iowa that's got this exact same cell line and same mutation sees that, maybe she'll think, wow, this really might work for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Well, we have listeners all around the world. Over 100 countries have listened to Cannabis Health Radio, and maybe we can find someone who has that. What other questions do you have for us?
Well, I'm in this place right now where it seems like I really need to stay on the cannabis. So I'm wondering, how many patients have you spoken to with cancer that have really maintained their remission, and do they all have to stay on the cannabis, and how long? And what kinds of patterns have you seen from people who've managed to shrink their tumors?
Corey, that's for you.
Well, what I've seen is that almost inevitably with people who, in quotations, cure themselves and stop taking oil, it comes back.
Yeah.
The people that remain on a maintenance dose tend to do really, really well. Mm-hmm. I'm 8 years out, just about 8 years cancer-free. I remain on a maintenance dose, and I haven't had any issues at all.
Okay.
So it's very, very important to continue with using cannabinoids after you've cleared yourself. You don't have to do it. My experience is you don't need to do it in the, concentration that you were, so at a much reduced rate, but yes, definitely. And on a daily basis, like I just take a little bit every night.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because I feel part of the reason that people get sick in the first place is that whole lack of cannabinoids in their bodies out of balance. So you create that homeostasis when you start taking cannabinoids, and then all of a sudden you quit it again. Well, you're just going to go back to where you were.
Yeah. The research coming out of Oxford is for ovarian cancer specifically. He said endocannabinoid dysfunction seems to lead to malignancies. In the gynecological malignancies.
I believe it leads to malignancies, period. But
but it seems to be especially powerful with ovarian. Maybe be the tissue types, but yeah. Well, it's just really scary for me to think going forward that I need these molecules every day, and we don't understand how they work. So I appreciate that you're 8 years out and you take some every day, and you're still here because. It's hard for me to have that faith that it's going to work. And it just makes it scary going forward. I really swing from being very confident and feeling, cocky even, like, wow, look what I figured out, even though it's all of the researchers in the labs around the world, but to being very scared that we don't know how this works. And someday it may just stop working. So it would be really great to have some kind of, remission support group. I feel like all these patients are out there, and we just need to collect that data and help people, because it's going to be so long, I think, unfortunately, since there's, until there's real science. So that's what I'm going to try to do.
Perfect. Excellent. Michelle, you're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Corey.
We really appreciate you telling your story and getting your message out.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And you guys saved my life. I appreciate your dedication to this, and all those people who've put stories up on the internet, when you see enough of them. So I'm so grateful for you, and thanks for everything that you've done to help everyone know the power of this plant.
Well, thank you, Michelle. We didn't save your life. You saved your life.
Well,
because you took action.
I'm all about action now. Yep.
All right, action girl. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey, so much. It was really great to talk with you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And we'd like to thank our listeners for supporting us and sharing our podcast with others who would benefit from hearing these testimonials about the healing power of cannabis. And if you'd like to support Cannabis Health Radio so we can continue doing this, a few ways you can do it. You can become a monthly supporter for as little as $5 a month on our Patreon page, and you can also make a one-time donation through our website, Cannabis Health Radio. And we'll be back with another testimonial next week.
Thanks for listening to Cannabis Health Radio. For more information and to search previous podcasts, visit our website, cannabishealthradio.com. Subscribe so you don't miss new episodes. And follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. This podcast is made possible by donations from our listeners. If you found the information helpful, please consider making a donation in any amount through our website. You can also help us share our message by leaving a review on your podcast listening platform. We are very grateful for your support. Thank you.